a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and the European Union, a milestone that reflects 5 decades of growing economic, cultural, and political exchange. As the world faces increasing challenges, from global governance and regional security to climate change and food security, international cooperation has never been more important. How can nations work together to build sustainable partnerships that transcend geopolitical tensions and promote long-term mutual benefits? How can we ensure that global challenges are addressed through collaboration rather than confrontation? To delve deeper into these questions, we are honored to talk to Grzegorz Kolotko, former Deputy Prime Minister of Poland and distinguished professor at Beijing Normal University's Belt and Road School. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program. As you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of China-Europe relations. And given your experience of working both in academia and in politics in Europe, how do you assess the current China-Europe relations?
Far from perfect, but not as bad as, for instance, the US-China's relations. Basically, the critical issue, from my perspective, is the economic cooperation. But the problem is that the European Union is only a union by name. So there are some internal contradictions between the countries, the states of the European Union. And for that reason, I think to coordinate the policy from Brussels' perspective towards China is a little bit more complex than the other way around. But my general evaluation is a positive one. It is visible if we take a look into the amount of trade, export, import, both directions, transfer of technology, but also cultural exchange. So I think expect much more than we have accomplished so far, but definitely the world has changed during these 50 years of Chinese-European cooperation for better. Much more could be accomplished if not the policy mistakes, especially on the European side. So I'm looking into the future with some optimism.
Since you mentioned the European Union in Brussels, I want to ask, because I've read a theory a lot. It says there's a duality in China-Europe relations where on the European Union level, the two sides seems not to be doing so good. But on a country-to-country basis, China-Europe relations is pretty strong. So what's your take on that?
There are the countries so small as Malta or Luxembourg, about 400, less than 500,000 of people. Small countries like Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then there are the very big countries, which are by very nature much more influential. Basically, in this is Germany, France, but also Italy and Spain, and then my country, Poland. So therefore, the relative strength of a particular member of the European Union for the overall policies of the European Union, including relation, cooperation, arguing, etc., with China, is a different one. And then you can go from point to point to point and study which country, which is the member of the European Union, is more engaged in economic, cultural, technological, capital exchange with China. So there are the countries which are more engaged in this exchange, and therefore they are trying to make an impact upon the other countries and the European Union as such, to go farther, deeper, stronger into this cooperation. So from this perspective, we are so-called European Union, but the overall relations between EU and China depends very much on what is like the attitude in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Poland. The more these countries are in favor of enlarging and deepening the Chinese-European cooperation, the better, I think, for each and every country which is involved.
Some argue that there is a strategic hesitation in the current China-Europe relations. Do you think what you've just said contribute to that hesitation? And where does that come from?
The things happen the way because many things happen at the same time. There are some internal processes, there are some international environment, and there's also some pressure from outside. You can bet that the United States, and especially under the second Trump administration, is not very much in favor of deepening cooperation between anybody and China, including the European Union. So I can see it also from the perspective of my country, that there are different means of American pressure not to go farther with developing relations with China. So the US is intervening with the country's policies vis-à-vis China in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, but also in the European Union. And then we go to square one. It depends on the interest. China is very competitive and depends in what sector of the economy one is involved. As a worker, employee, or employer, businessman, some of them, they are taking cream of cooperation with China, and some of them, they pay the cost because they are not able to stand the competitiveness of China's industries, especially manufacturing. So for that reason, if one will say engage in motor car industry in Poland or Slovakia or Spain, it's hardly very sympathetic towards deepening cooperation with China, because China is now a strong competitor, especially on the field of electrical vehicles. And some of the people over there, yes, some of them, they lost the job. You cannot expect from them to be pro-Chinese, especially since they are told that you have lost the job, not because of the wrong domestic policy, because of competition from China, and they are being also fed by the misinformation that this Chinese competition is unfair. And these problems which we have with economic growth, income, employment, restructuring, are being exploited for the reason of domestic political fight. And some simply are just using this xenophobic instrument as the instrument, their means to their political ends. So this is a complex issue. There is not just one reason, one factor. It is a combination, because one more time the things happen the way they do because many things happen at the same time.
Some people could argue that the business interest is not powerful enough, at least in the current stage, to overcome the populist rise. Do you think that's true? How do you think that's going to impact the relationship between the two sides?
I would say that good politics is to take into account the expectations, the abilities, the ambitions of the business, but there's a difference. Business of business is business. Business of politics is to keep social balance, to take care of well-being, of three equilibrium development, not only the economic one, but social on the one hand, and ecological on the one hand. And sometimes there are the contradictions. But now when I'm taking a look, what are the roots, what are the mechanisms, and what are the consequences of the contemporary trade war, which again has started, was initiated by the United States against China, because the American economy is not capable to stay firm on Chinese growing competitiveness. The business is in favor of continuing this economic cooperation. Pretty often I hear that this is the end of globalization, at least the end of globalization as we know it. I do not share this viewpoint. There is a turbulence, there is the restructuring, redesigning of globalization, I hope, towards what you call in China win-win, that is inclusive globalization. And here, if you are taking a look at what side in this struggle for future of globalization, for making it more inclusive, is business, both in Europe, in China, elsewhere. Business is on the side of continuing globalization because it is good in the long run for business. Again, not for each sector, not at every moment of time, not in each country and region, but in general. For that reason, I think that the business people, the managers, the investors, the financiers, by and large, they are in favor of continuation of globalization and enhancing the economic cooperation. But sometimes they act against because of taking care of their own concern, of their own business.
The French president, Emmanuel Macron, is going to visit China starting December 3rd. It will be a 3-day visit. Looking ahead, how do you think his visit could impact the China-Europe relations at this moment?
Very much. I would say it's critical. As I said before, European Union is a union of 27 countries of different size. France, together with Germany, is the core of the European Union. And my personal view is that as far as the leaders of the countries of the European Union are concerned, the most progressive is Macron, Emmanuel Macron. I do remember his previous visit to China when he met with Chinese leader President Xi Jinping a couple of years ago. He was, and he is, so powerful that at that time he invited to accompany him the chairwoman of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. This visit of President Macron, has contributed not only to the bilateral cooperation between France and China, but also in getting momentum for improvement of the relations between whole European Union and China. And now the geopolitical situation to which you have referred is more challenging, is more complex because of very many issues. And from that reason, the political dimension of President Macron's visit will be, I think, is more important now than a couple of years ago, and my expectations are positive. I'm looking also for the feedback exposed after Macron meeting Chinese leaders. President Xi Jinping, Prime Minister Li Qiang will return to France. Definitely, he will brief the other European leaders. Triangle, London, Berlin, Paris, is critical for all the European political and economic theater, also vis-à-vis relations with China. So do expect some good news from the visit of President Macron to Beijing, and we should support, the deepening of the cooperation between China and France, because it is also a good for the cooperation between the whole European Union and China.
As a country, Poland, that has been deeply impacted by the Second World War, how important it is for China and Japan and perhaps the world to uphold the post-war structure to promote peace?
It's extremely important. We are from different parts of the world. But as you mentioned, 80 years ago, what was over, that was the World War. We are in one world. We are Europe, you are Asia. But the tensions which do happen in one place and another place, somehow there are feedback, they are linked. I think that what is now going on here in China, the reaction for ill-advised comment of Prime Minister of Japan, Mrs. Taikachi, it's something what you may compare between the relations between Poland and Russia. 80 years ago, the Soviet army was fighting the German Nazis, moving all the way to Berlin, and same as China, arm with America, was fighting the Japanese militarism, and Taiwan was occupied by Japan till 1945, till the end of the war, same as Poland was occupied by the German Nazis. And it has changed here with the assistance of US, in Poland with the assistance of the then Soviet Union and Russia. Now the situation has changed completely. Now Japan is an ally of the United States, and the United States is pretty often pointing to China as a kind of foe of enemy. We see differently the case in Europe. And now we have improved our relations with Germany, which we were fighting 85 years ago. But the relations between Poland and Germany now are also far from perfect. There are some political tensions, even more political than the economic one. So for that reason, I think that, one more time, it is good to listen to men of state like President Xi Jinping and to ask us, and then in Japan, in Germany, in Russia, in Poland, in China, what it is global initiative for peace, global governance initiative, global cultural initiative, this global initiative of President Xi Jinping are pointing to the direction, if not of the solutions, at least for a dialogue, negotiations, how to improve the things. Now the question is coming to the fore. In whose favor raising of the temperature of Cold War is? Almost 40% of hundreds of billions of weapons to which President Trump is referring as wonderful American weapons. Almost 40% is US export. You know how much, for instance, is from China? Less than 6%. So who is fueling this Cold War atmosphere? And from this perspective, you have to see also this unwise comment by Prime Minister Takaichi about Taiwan. So there is a part of business and there is a part of political class, quite influential, which is in favor of enhancing the intensity of this Cold War because it is profitable for them. But it is very costly for us, for the people which simply would prefer to live in a stable solution.
Now, what do you think Takaichi should do to reconcile her relationship, the Japanese relationship with China, given her remarks over Taiwan?
Well, I would say that it is non-leader, including Mrs. Takaichi, is geography. It's history. She will not be that long the Prime Minister of Japan. It's not my cup of tea to make a judgment to this end, but what I'm here and there, even some former Prime Ministers of Japan are very critical for what she has said. They are saying that she was committing a mistake, serious mistake, making such an unwise comment. So I wouldn't say that what Mrs. Takaichi said is overall Japanese attitude. I know also a little bit Japan, maybe not as good as China, and I think that most of the Japanese people, they are not accepting this kind of narrative which was expressed by the current Prime Minister.
Because some of the comments that I've read on the internet is that many people don't understand why the question over Taiwan is such a big deal. Can you explain to them how important is the Taiwan question to China and to the post-Second World War order?
One point is that we, the people of academia, intellectuals, we have to make our voice heard. What is the truth? How the history has evolved? Who was an invader? Who was fighting for what reason? And how the situation looked. And for that purpose, I'm afraid that in a lion's share of the world, there is not a full understanding why the Taiwan question is so critical, so important for China. The Taiwan question is being used as an instrument for the political fight within the world. More often than not, they listen, they hear in the US, in Western Europe, that China is a potential aggressor for Taiwan and you do not have any rights to Taiwan. It's a different narrative. And it is going without further, deeper explanation. Very many people, they are not aware even of the fact that Taiwan was occupied and in a very nasty, brutal way by Japan since the end of 19th century till 1945. And at that time, we both, America, West, were fighting with Japan also for getting Taiwan back to China.
Since you mentioned the United States several times, how would you assess the China-US relationship right now? Because a lot of things have happened in 2025.
US-China's relations are absolutely critical for the whole world. This is the relation between two most powerful countries, which are competing vis-a-vis economic might, but also critical for the future development technologies. But also, what is very important, China and US is also competing for influence, including economic one and to the extent political one, in so-called global South. I can tell you the story. I'm here in Beijing this time for teaching my students international MBA program at the famous Beijing Normal University. There is 88 students from 43 countries, mostly from Asia and Middle East and Africa. And it is very interesting because my class is on geopolitical changes and the influence upon economic development. So I'm explaining also to my international students here in China how this competition between US and China is making an impact of the chances, prospects for economic development. So one must see the rivalry between China and US, not only as who is stronger, etc., but also who has more to gain or to offer to the other parts of the world. My second point is that, of course, I see these relations negative, especially because of the current American administration. They declared trade war against China, and they are losing this trade war. The US has not the ability to conquer, to defeat China as far as trade war is concerned. How unwise it is to start the war which you cannot win. It was obvious for professionals, for technocrats, for common sense people that US is not able to win the trade war with China. Is China winning the trade war? Well, it depends what you mean by winning, but definitely it is less costly for China than it will be costly for the United States.
Let's turn the conversation to China now. So next year, China will unveil its 15th five-year plan. Since your work here in China and both on the international stage, what do you look for in this 15th five-year plan the most? What priorities or key structural transformations do you expect?
Domestically, I think it is critical to shift the driving force for economic growth from investment and export to consumption. During the 15 years plan, 2026-2030, favorable toward this restructuring from investment to consumption, the better for sustaining economic growth. I think it is still feasible to stay the course of plus minus 5% rate of growth annually on the average during next 5 years in terms of GDP. On the international scale, where China will be not weaker, China will be stronger, but in a different way. And I think it's a factor which is contributing to the peaceful development of the world, which is not seen always in this same way by some policymakers in the West.
Since you work in the Belt and Road School at the Beijing Normal University, I want to ask you, where do you see as the most significant or the most underappreciated factor of the BRI that could shape globalization in the future?
I'm positive about Belt and Road Initiative. You know, after all, during this 12, 13 years of Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched about 2012, China has invested directly in the remaining part of the world, something in an order of $1.3 billion. Several dozen of millions of people are not unemployed. They got a job because of the Belt and Road Initiative. And there is another question which nobody is asking. Because of this reason, how many million less of people emigrated from South Asia, Middle East, and Africa to Europe, or from Latin America to North America? China came first with this bold infrastructure investment and economic assistance project towards Global South or developing countries. And only then, ex post, afterwards, there was the response of the United States with their program, and there was the response of the European Union with our program, European Gateway, which is much smaller than the Belt and Road Initiative. So we see also a kind of competition between China, European Union, and the United States vis-à-vis investing, coming, engaging with economic cooperation, infrastructure investment with the countries of Global South, which is a positive factor for development of this very positive South. the more that type of rivalry, that type of competition is, the better. That is the good recipe for the future, not, the military competition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this edition of The Hub. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.
The mother put the porcelain spoon. The mother drew back and pulled the little girl back. But the mother did not hear the old voice. The mother.
Experience the heartwarming story of a mother's love that knows no bounds, titled The Mother, written by Nobel Prize-winning author Pearl S. Buck. It's a story of love, sacrifice, and the universalism of motherhood that transcends race and borders, told through an account of an unnamed mother living in rural China in the early 20th century. Get the audiobook right now at radio.cgtn.com or any major podcast platform. Simply search for the Books and Beyond podcast and key in The Mother.